Louisville.
Hi, I work with brain injury patients, and we recently have two patients who both have severe aphasias. One of them has a global aphasia, and the other one, it's more like he can find the category of the word he wants, but not the actual word. And I was wondering if you had any tips or hints or anything for working with patients who are aphasic.
Again, this is one of those questions that I'm kind of, in a sense, it's above my pay grade in that I never received clinical training or have clinical expertise. Certainly, it very much depends on the age of the person and on the idiosyncrasies of their particular brain injury, how much and what kind of therapy can be effective. In some cases, it can be extremely effective, and probably you and the clinical neurologists and neuropsychologists that you work with are aware of programs of therapy and rehabilitation that can make the most of what language skills these patients still have.
You wrote in a Newsweek story some time ago, depressed people don't have lazy souls. The parts of their brains that could snap out of it are not working properly. To depressed people, it is objectively obvious that their prospects are hopeless. Tweaking the brain with drugs may sometimes be the best way to jumpstart the machinery that we call the will.
Yes. Syndromes like depression probably are heterogeneous across people. I think in all cases there's a common core that depression is an adaptive response to certain kinds of loss, situations that force you to stop what you've been doing, to rethink your situation, perhaps to see the world more accurately. Most of us are the victims or the beneficiaries of positive illusions. We actually overestimate how competent we are, how knowledgeable, how effective, what our chances in life are. It probably helps us to keep going. And in many ways, depressed people have a more accurate assessment of life's odds than non-depressed people. And I think that's the reason why we're subject to depression in the first place. There are cases in which we have to slow down, stop doing what we've been doing. As they say about holes, the first law of the hole is if you're in one, stop digging. On the other hand, there are also cases in which depression can take on a life of its own, when it's longer lasting than any possible adaptive readjustment of your life. Because of heritable differences, some people are just innately more susceptible to depression than others. Because of abnormalities in brain chemistry that can prolong a depression beyond any point of usefulness. And for those things, I'm not at all squeamish about the proper use of antidepressants. And the attitude that you sometimes hear, well, depressed people, they just need a swift kick in the rear end. They're just being lazy. Can be deeply ignorant and cruel, because to the person who's in the depressed state, it's just objectively correct that life is hopeless. And it's not a matter of just getting a swift kick, but really jump-starting yourself into the point of view where something that you do can make a difference, which is exactly what you aren't thinking in the throes of a deep depression. So I think an understanding just that the brain is a biochemical system, and intelligently applied changes to that chemistry, I think, can be enormously humane.
And what about the situation in terms of the its relativity to language? Have there been any studies done to mental illness versus the use of language or the extent of vocabulary of people who have experienced depression or mental illness?
Yeah, there does seem to be a difference in depression and anxiety. That anxiety seems to involve images. You imagine yourself in some threatening situation and vividly and concretely live through what it would be like to be in this threatening or challenging scenario. Depression seems to be a bit more verbal. People who are depressed will say things to themselves like, life is hopeless, there's no reason to go on, nothing makes any difference, life has nothing that makes it worth living. And I don't know why there is this difference, but depression seems to be a bit more verbal, anxiety a little bit more imagistic.
Let's go to San Diego next. Hello.
Hi. This is Denise. Hi, Dr. Pinker.
Hello.
I was just curious on your thoughts with, first of all, a couple questions are kind of connected. Carl Jung and his collective unconscious and how that would work with the brain chemistry. And then, since our senses are what are subjective to what we see, hear, think, feel, how can you explain to me what things like telepathy or the collective unconscious or chemistry between others or experiences outside of knowledge, outside of your thinking mind, is there a way for you to explain through your studies those experiences, or do you even believe in them? And that's it. Thanks.
Well, Jung, in talking about universal archetypes, themes and symbols that people in many cultures seem to find compelling, I think was talking about certain features of human nature. There are certain themes that people everywhere will find fascinating, such as a righteous hero conquering evil, perhaps winning the love of a worthy woman, fights against animals, conflicts within a family. And collective unconscious may be a fancy way of talking about themes of that we all appreciate because of our shared nature. Jung's particular mechanism of collective racial memory, that somehow something happens to a tribe and it gets internalized, is very unlikely. And in answer to the question of telepathy, out-of-body experiences, and so on, I believe the evidence suggests that they don't exist. So that makes it easy to look for an explanation, namely there's nothing to explain, and so you don't need anything fancy. I think all of the attempts to get around coincidence, false memory, outright charlatans, such as stage magicians who use magic tricks to make you think that they're doing telepathy, all of those have been exposed, and there's no reason right now to believe that there is anything that can't be accounted for by the laws of physics and brain physiology.
Texas next. Wimberley, Texas.
Hello?
You're on the air. Please go ahead.
Okay. Given the work that you do in cognitive science and linguistics, I was wondering if you've reached any conclusions over the old metaphysical debate in philosophy called the problem of universals. In other words, the realism, nominalism debate over concepts.
Well, I think the answer might be different for different kinds of concepts, and some of this pertains to debates in philosophy where I can't claim any expertise. Let's say numbers. I think there are many mathematicians who would say that they have a kind of reality. It's not that they're out there in some part of the universe, but that they exist independent of human knowers, such that all intelligent agents would have to discover their properties in much the same ways. That's a position in the philosophy of mathematics that I find congenial. For things like Democrats and Republicans, or a rook in chess, or a goalie in hockey, whether they have some reality independent of human knowers is much more obscure, and I don't know if I have a strong opinion on that. Certainly when you enter into some kind of games rule system, certain things necessarily follow, so there's a sense in which they have reality when they're well specified. But more than that would be probably more metaphysical than I can credibly pronounce on.
Next question for Dr. Pinker is from San Francisco.
Hey, greetings. I wanted to ask you about the old parable about Babylon, and whether you have any concept about that. I don't know if you've got any economic training, and if you have a concept of that. And before that, you had a question came up just a minute ago about Barack Obama's middle name and whatnot. And I'm wondering also if you're familiar with the old concept in Judeo-Christian etymology, God's true name is Yahweh, and there was a tradition that if you wanted to talk about God, but you didn't want God to be listening, you never said God's true name. You would say God's name slightly differently, so that you could talk about him without, in a kind of a